So today we're going to go over a bit of a speech that Peter Mandelson gave, and I can't really help but agree with what he had to say in this speech. And I know before we get into this speech, Peter Mandelson is not everyone's favorite cup of tea. I get it. I understand. But hey, sometimes people say things that, you agree with. I mean, I was really shocked that only a couple of weeks ago, I was agreeing with Nadine Dorries that the UK should be heading to for a general election. And even I was shocked by myself agreeing with what Nadine Dorries had to say. But I think what Peter Mandelson has to say here, I think, is quite important because Rishi Sunak really does have a choice. He can either focus on trying to save the British economy. And in order to do that, we've made it on this channel abundantly clear. How many times have we covered businesses on this channel who have lost like 30% of their export business because it's no longer worth doing business with Europe because of the trade barriers that have been put up? Look at the videos we did about the Old Dairy Brewery, one of the export champions of Brexit, that very quickly, almost to a T, stopped exporting because of Brexit. And when you've got businesses like that, and this isn't just like an occasional one or two, it has been constantly happening. The challenges that businesses have had to face. And then, of course, that's one end. And then the other end, does he want to save Brexit? Because the more he pushes ahead with the Brexit, like the Brexiteers want, the harder it is for our economy to try and recover. And of course, as we've said, the Bank of England, we are potentially heading into a recession that is going to be probably just as bad, or if not even longer, than the one we had in the 1930s. So, economics wise, it's not looking good. And remember, while the rest of Europe might also be having similar economic problems, they are not having them as bad as we are. One of the things we always said about Brexit, it would leave the UK economy far more vulnerable to the shocks that we have seen that have led us to this point. So let's get into his speech and what he had to say about this, because I think, to be honest, he's 100% right about the conundrum that Rishi Sunak finds himself in. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And of course, there's a YouTube thank you button down below as well, and the YouTube subscription down below is also where you can join the Pony Club. And you'll find those down below in the doobly-doo. So as always, thank you very much to everyone who does support the channel. Even if you do, just click the like and share button. So today we go off to the New European, who covered this bit of Peter Mandelson's speech. So let's go into it. With Rishi Sunak, Britain is now on its third Prime Minister this year. And given the year's chaos and uncertainty that we have been through, people will be relieved that an adult appears to have re-entered the room. Britain needs a government providing stability and competence, a restoration of standards and integrity in public life, and a strong forward programme that gives Britain the sense of direction and purpose. In particular, we need to set our economy on course for growth, sustainability, and fairer distribution. So, what will Sunak do to grip Britain's profound economic challenges, as he has called it? Above all, this requires honesty, and it is about the choices and trade-offs that we face. Telling the Conservative Party to unite or die is one thing, and I have been telling my own party that for decades. The country needs to know we must change or decline, and apart from roaring back from fiscal madness, it is not clear how the new Prime Minister thinks we should change. We are now lagging at the bottom of the league table of the G7 advanced economies in growth, productivity, investment, and real wages. It is true that we even haven't fully recovered since the banking crisis of 2008. And by the way, the UK and certainly the north of England has not even recovered since the deindustrialization of the Margaret Thatcher era. So make no mistake, um, we are really suffering. We are really suffering in the UK, and we need more than just someone who is good with money. We need people who are going to provide Britain a good vision. And go back all the way to the white paper, the levelling up white paper. As we always said, the first two chapters were astounding, laying out very clearly what the problems of the UK were. And then you got to the solutions page, the money page, where Rishi Sunak was involved. And he would not put the amount of money that the first two chapters clearly indicated that the UK would need to actually level up. So leveling up is certainly not going to be on his agenda, despite how much he has said he's going to follow the 2019 manifesto, even bringing back Michael Gove as the head of leveling up. But anyway, back to it. So, and there have been structural weaknesses in the UK, which I recognised when I was the business secretary, and which have not even properly been addressed. These weaknesses lie in the low levels of industrial and technological investment, poor skills attainment, and the laborious system of planning approvals, weak infrastructure and public services, and acute regional imbalances. We have also been knocked further by the pandemic and now the war in Ukraine. But what is unique is setting Britain apart from our competitors are the mounting effects of Brexit, which have been hard to quantify given everything else which is going on, but are becoming clearer in lost trade, higher prices, and labour shortages. Brexit is the elephant in the room which few want to talk about. And that sums it all up, really. It really is that case. The Conservatives don't want to talk about it. Labour doesn't want to talk about it. It is the elephant in the room. And someone is going to have to be brave enough and actually stand up and talk about it. Eventually, it will have to happen. But anyway, back to it. For Sunak, this is particularly hard because Brexit remains the abiding fault line in his party. Not over whether to Brexit, but having Brexited, what policies we follow next. This absence of any agreed plan hangs like a cloud over the government. What we've been talking about since it happened. The Conservative Party does not know which way it wants to go. But back to it. Those who wanted a hard Brexit won the day under Boris Johnson. Then Liz Truss wanted something even less functional by ripping up the trade agreements we had for Northern Ireland. This fundamental question for Sunak is, does he continue with the process of de-alignment and non-cooperation with Europe, or does he start rebuilding trust and new relationships with our former partners in the EU, starting with the Northern Ireland Protocol? Until he comes down clearly on which side or other he is going to be absolutely stymied on much else about what he wants to do. This is a big test of his leadership. He has to put the nations need to work with the EUs to solve common problems before the desire of many in his party is to seek confrontation with Europe at every turn. So far, the Prime Minister has given no clear indication about what approach he is going to take. The irony in all this is what Britain has gone through since the summer. The moment we were all dreading was the death of the Queen after 70 years on the throne. This has shown the country is at its absolute best, a source of great pride. But just a fortnight later, we saw Britain at its worst, an appallingly irresponsible financial event at a time of a European war and acute global economic fragility, which very spooked the horses, which so much tore off and they dragged the markets and the economy behind them. This was not just a policy misturn, but the culmination of Britain's unmooring from its post-war economic history and the belief that only Brexit was worth having is a libertarian, free market, small state, low tax Brexit, lazily called a Singapore-on-the-Thames version of Brexit. And those who oppose this are not in the true spirit of Brexit. We've said this so many times. The libertarians in the Conservative Party are still there. They still want to achieve that libertarian free market, small state, low tax version of Brexit that they so desperately cling on to. They are still there and they still want that. But at the moment, Peter Mandelson has called it right. Rishi Sunak has not come down on his side of what Brexit actually means for the party. Because say what you will about that section of the party, at least they had an idea. One that many of the Conservatives did really not share. That just goes to show you how really small the desire for Brexit really was in the Conservative Party. But back to it. Sunak voted for Brexit and might be sympathetic to this policy outcome. But he has also demonstrated that he recognises economic reality and hard choices. This is the essence of the conflict bedeviling the Conservative Party, which Sunak must bury or be the next Conservative leader to be buried by it. He is not going to be able to confront the challenges facing Britain without first taking on and defeating those who won't face up to the reality of our post-Brexit economic trade choices and the importance of building a stable relationship with the EU. Only once he has done this, assuming he wants to, can he make Brexit work. But here is the further point. It is not going to be possible to make Brexit work without revisiting and rethinking the original terms on which we left the EU. It was the hardest of hard Brexits, a disastrous deal that has produced the devastating effects on British trade, competitiveness, prices, and growth that are building now. It is not going to be possible to lift the UK trade and growth without forming a better relationship with Europeans' vast single market and customs union in the view of frictionless trade barriers created by the original negotiation. The UK trade in goods with Europe has become simply too cumbersome, too costly, and too bureaucratic and too slow, and is becoming a major drag on our growth rate. And as we said at the beginning, how many times on this channel have we covered businesses? Just recently, we covered British Volt. Really a true casualty of Brexit. Because who's going to want to buy from this gigafactory when all its customers are in Europe? Most of the British big motor industries, most of them have gone to Europe, or they've downsized their role in the UK market. Are we shocked that this massive factory that opened suddenly has gone? Most of our customer base is now in Europe, and it's now harder to trade with Europe. Oh no, we need financial support. Please, government, help us out. We're desperate for help. Please help us. We should not be surprised. So back to it. These regulatory barriers now stand in the way of much as our services trade. Businesses are moving from Britain to the EU. Business investment is growing in the rest of Europe, but is plateauing in the UK. Growth forecasts for Britain in the coming years indicate no improvement. We will not have the living standards we would otherwise enjoy. Spending on public services will be further squeezed, and we will not be able to afford to defend ourselves as we would like. Therefore, we do not have the same influence in the world, and this is not Project Fear, this is reality, and any government will have to come to terms with it. Labour will say that because of their internal divisions, the Conservatives are not capable of resolving all these issues, but Labour is not blameless, having allowed the Conservatives to rule without effective challenge for most of the last decade. Labour now has another chance to redeem itself and serve the country. Following the dramatic turnaround in the party's fortunes over the last 2 years under Keir Starmer, Labour is not going to reopen the original Brexit decision, but nor should it be held hostage to its original terms. Because we know that Britain needs to export trade opportunities in Europe for more fully if we are going to start growing again. Starmer has already shown in his own party that he's prepared to make difficult choices. One concerns the necessary partnership between businesses and government. He wants businesses to work better and to change in order to do so. But he doesn't have the ideological hang-ups about businesses. He has also strong instincts on security and defense. He is not a wobbler, and he knows he will have to cooperate more, not less, and closely with Europe and international partners in the face of new security challenges. Let me channel Margaret Thatcher in offering one last thought. In 1979, when we were approaching the sea change election that brought her to power, she observed of the then Labour government that it was, quote, "It is not just that they have governed badly, it is because they have reached a dead end. The very nature of their party now prevents them from governing successfully." What a way to sum up the current Conservative government. What a way to sum up the current Conservative government. Yeah. Wow. But back to it. People are now reaching a similar view now. And if we are reaching a dead end, then we need to turn a page and begin the next chapter in our national story. Central to this chapter is how we start building Britain's growth prospects and Britain's relationship in Europe in order to do so. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I've said this before about, many politicians. You're not going to agree with everything they say. Like I say, I don't agree 100% with everything Peter Mandelson says. I think fundamentally me and him would probably have some very, very different policy ideas about what we wanted to get done. But there's one thing we do definitely agree on, and that is that Britain does need to have a closer relationship with Europe. That is not going to change. And he is right in pointing out that in order to face reality of the UK's economic situation, you have to have a conversation about Brexit. You cannot escape it. So, and much like I've said before in the House of Lords, just this past week, there have been adult conversations in Brexit. And you put that in contrast with some of the conversations that happen in and around Brexit. Just look at the recent EU revocation bill, where Jacob Rees-Mogg went out and even accused own members of his party of wanting to refight the Brexit battles all over again. Even accusing some of them of being secret remainers. Yeah. And until at least many of the parties, including the Conservative and Labour parties, and certainly others, I mean, the SNP is the only party who is saying very clearly, we should rejoin the EU. But of course, they're talking about, Scotland. But even then, that will have severe challenges for them. Again, something that they don't really talk about, but there you go. You've got to have an old conversation about it. And until we really do, and I've said before, I think Starmer's stance on this is this current Brexit deal has worked and that he isn't really beholden to the deal that Conservatives signed, that he can go forward and he can create those closer relationships that will eventually lead us to rejoining the EU. So, as always, like I say what we still about Peter Mandelson, but I think this speech is entirely on point, especially that Margaret Thatcher quote. That sums up the current Conservative Party 110%. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that quote, to be honest. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and our affiliation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, we'll see you all next time.